let me tell you, millennials and Gers like a story. Mm-hmm. They like a story by video more than anything. TikTok, right?
YouTube and such, yes.
But how can you tell your story in a way that they get it in such a short time?
Welcome to Crown and Connections with Rob Clemons. Today we're going to do some business talk, which is my favorite thing. If you're a business leader, and that could be a manager or a business owner, I've got a topic today that I think is really, really relevant to you. And you need to be listening because we're all out there and we're having issues with hiring. And then once you hire the right person, we need to make sure we're managing them properly. And something we don't talk about much is generational differences, and we're talking about the difference between having the Gen Zs and the millennials and the Gen Xs and the baby boomers and all that good stuff. So I actually am blessed today to have a resident expert in this subject.
You're too kind.
Oh, yeah. Oh, come on now. And she's humble, and that's great. Eileen Soisson from the Meeting Institute. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, you know, some of the stuff that you've done, and I've heard you speak at some events, and always really, really great information comes out of you. And my staff members, before I met you the first time, they were like, you've got to hear this person. She's got great information. And me as the general manager of the company I'm at, obviously, always looking for a leg up on understanding where we need to be. So welcome to the show, but tell us a little bit about yourself for the people who have not heard of your work yet.
Great. Well, I am Eileen Soisson, and I get to run the Meeting Institute, and we provide training programs, consulting services, like retreat facilitation, and I also get to be part of Leadership Grandstand with the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber, and I facilitate their leadership classes.
Nice.
And one thing we noticed was that the different generations were definitely stepping out and stepping on others. And we wanted to talk about that and say, okay, is this what all leaders go through? And we started hearing some grumblings of, well, why can't they just do their jobs? Or why do they want flex time? And you got to lead through that. So we added that as a class into LGS as part of the 9-month program, and it's been greatly received. People saying, I didn't think I needed to know this, but wow, has it helped me lead better, understand better, hopefully retain employees, which with workforce development, that's much needed right now. So talking about generations, it's not common sense. If it was common sense, it would be much more common of how to manage amongst.
I mean, it's so not common sense. I feel like it's almost like counterintuitive in some cases because we want to believe that generation after generation, this is how you do it. This is how I learned to do it. This is how I'm going to teach people to do it. But then there's this monkey wrench thrown in, which is, oh no, there's groups that totally do things differently. If you would, before we get into that, about your company, you mentioned some great stuff that you're doing there, and I know that you travel around the country a little bit as we were planning this show today, which is really cool. Talk about, did you say something about retreats? How does that work out?
Yeah, I get to facilitate retreats where we'll do different personality assessments, figure out how to work through some of the conflict, how to work through some of the bias that exists within the workplace, and then sometimes getting back to the basics of customer service.
Wow. Okay. So you go on a retreat, and is this somewhat of a team building element too?
Some are. I've been doing a lot of nonprofits lately. Nonprofits are really seeing that through the pandemic, they have to step up what their value is to the community. So they're really realigning strategic plans right now, and I love working with a nonprofit who wants to make an impact.
Man, so powerful, right?
So their retreats are a little more, hey, we have 7 hours to get a strategic plan done. Let's focus on customer service. Where are our priorities?
Well, and I can imagine that's an interesting challenge with a nonprofit, right? Because a lot of these people are volunteers. And how do you make, and I don't mean this in a bad way, because I think volunteers are lovely people, to take your time and to put it into something that, you know that you're probably not making any money on. But is there ever a challenge in these retreats with people understanding that they do indeed need to still have good customer service even though they're not paid?
Oh, absolutely. And especially when you have some people who are in that veteran traditionalist generation who's retired. And they still want that purpose. They still want value. So how do you build that into a volunteer? And the worst thing I can hear at an establishment or organization is when people say, oh, they're just a volunteer.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if you say they're just a volunteer, then you probably treat them like just a volunteer.
Yeah.
And that's got to change because they are an internal customer of ours. So how do we take care of those volunteers to make sure they do want to stay with us, just like any other paid employee? because that's important.
That's a great point. And you know, I feel like a lot of times we undervalue people. I almost feel like I'm going in a different direction, but we undervalue people because it could be an employee that you have, whether it's a volunteer or not. And you don't realize all the things they've done in the past that make them of value. You know, think of some of these military people who might have been, you know,
Absolutely.
a colonel in the military and they're volunteering now. And we tend to not look at these people and understand that they've got great value, or just, oh, it's a volunteer, you know.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Look at where we live, you
Yeah.
know, here in you know, travel and tourism, hospitality is a big industry here. And trust me, our golf courses, some of our hotels, they depend on some of those people who retire here to want to get back, and maybe they came here and just wanted to volunteer and then
That's right.
got bored and came back to the workforce. So
Yeah, good point.
we need them.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very good points. And another thing is you talked about DISC assessments, personality profiles. Not necessarily DISC. We do a lot of those here, so I go there. Do you have a favorite personality profile to give people?
I'm a big fan of Clifton Strengths.
Okay.
And Clifton Strengths is what we used at Coastal Carolina University when I was there. And I think it is a great concept because it actually tells you how to work with the other strengths and then how to work through those weaknesses, especially during situations as a leader. So I like that one. I've kind of fallen off the bandwagon a little bit lately as far as staying fresh with it. Because with any assessment, it's how much do you do? How much do you apply? Do you journal? Do you assess it? So I will own up to that and say, well, it hasn't been much lately, but you asked the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, you know, one thing that I've found, and we're big on personality profiles and what we do here, and Myers-Briggs, DISC assessments, Enneagrams, all these different
love
ones.
Enneagram.
Oh, they're so good, right? What type of Enneagram are you? Do you remember what your number was?
I am a 7. No, I'm a 3. I'm a 3.
Oh, a 3. Okay, you're the performer. Okay,
Yes,
gotcha.
I'm a 3. And it's interesting because we use that as a book club. And at the whole table, we're arguing, no, that's not what you are. That's not what you are.
Oh, okay.
Because we all know each other so well.
Right,
but by
right,
the end, we're like, you're right. And it was
Yeah, you
really
are.
eye-opening when you do it with business friends or colleagues, and then you do it with close friends.
Absolutely.
Like a book club. And that was very interesting. And we still actually text each other with, that was so 3 of you.
Oh, yeah. You did the most 3 thing
Yeah, right?
today. You know, or 8's the challenger. It's like, stop aiding me.
Right.
Okay. You know, all right. So if anybody hasn't seen the Enneagram, I'm going to back off of that right now. They won't understand. But check out Enneagram. We should put that like little web URL up on the show here. But well, moving on to other things. You have a lot of great information on generations. So I'd like to spend some time talking about that with you. So if we could set a ground rule really quick, or just kind of a base level understanding, if you could run through each of the generations that we're commonly seeing right now, so probably starting with baby boomers in the business, and just tell us a little profile on each one if you don't mind.
Okay, absolutely. Well, we have, if you think about some of our retirees or even our olders, we have our traditionalists or what we call veterans, right? And they are still in the workplace volunteering or maybe perhaps on their way out. Boomers, that's that generation. That was my parents.
Okay, yep.
Right? And you know, you talk to a boomer and they're so overhearing, okay, boomer.
Oh, yeah, they're no fun anymore,
But then
right?
I say to them, but you're the same person who was calling out the millennials.
Yes, yep.
Right?
What is this thing with millennials and boomers? Why did they like skip the Gen X and just said, let's just get straight to the arguing between the two?
And the funny thing is, you still hear today some boomers and some veterans calling out the poor millennials, and now it's the Gen Zers. It's
Right.
not even the millennials.
Oh, I know. You know, it's like millennials catch everything, and then it's like, oh yeah, no, that's actually a different group altogether, which is something interesting. So I do want to talk about that.
Right. So you have your boomers, which would be my parents' generation. Then you have Gen X, which is my generation,
Right.
that born in the 70s. And it's interesting because Gen X is the smallest of years, but the most amount of people. So you think too, in the workplace, there's so many Gen Xers. So think about who's competing for those promotions, who's competing for that raise.
Yeah.
And right now, your Gen Xers are at the pinnacle of their careers.
Now the Gen X group is going to run from, and
Here,
if
I'll
you look at
double-check my
yeah,
numbers
double
to
check
be
the
sure.
stats on this, but well, and it
And
seems
as
like
a pure Gen Xer,
Yeah.
I need my cheaters. And that's not even, I didn't even set
And
that
here
up
you
as
are
a
cheating,
joke,
so there
right?
you go.
Because I can't even see the page. Rob, can you see on there?
It is. It looks like, so a Gen Xer, according to this one, is 1965 to 1979, which is interesting because you'll sometimes see other
Absolutely.
variations. And I guess there's like generally accepted groups, but so 65 to 79, right? And you say this is a small time range, but there's more people in there.
Absolutely. So think about that in the workplace, and as we also look to prepare for this generation to retire,
Yeah.
right? And this generation, with Gen Xers, they're now taking care of not only their children but their parents. You look at the impact of the pandemic and our parents getting older, now having to take care of two different sides, and that's something to think about in the workforce. What do we offer for benefits for those specific Gen Xers?
Absolutely.
To make sure that they have that flexibility to live up to that family value that we say we're supposed to have.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And while we're on this subject, you talk about the baby boomer group, and you said that they're still kind of in the workforce here and doing things. Do you see, and this may be getting off track a little bit, but do you see that time frame of expected work extending for baby boomers at all, or are they now finally saying, hey, I'm ready to release?
I think the pandemic changed a lot.
Yeah.
When people had to go to Zoom meetings, had to learn how to do Teams, that's a learning curve.
Yeah.
So you saw a lot of the traditionalists, the boomers saying, okay, do I really want to learn a new job, learn new skills? But then financially, would they be able to do that?
Yeah.
So that raised a lot of new questions that I don't think they expected to ask themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got the Generation X, and we're going to say that ended somewhere around 79 or 80, somewhere in that general vicinity. And then you get into Generation Y next, right?
We have our millennials, we have them, and the millennials, you think about every generation has a defining moment, right? So millennials, and a defining moment is anything that you remember from that generation that anyone else in your generation can remember, where they were, what they were wearing, where they were at. And for those millennials, that was September 11th. But you think the generations before that, they experienced it as well, but they already had their defining moments.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
Right.
Like Gen X, you're probably talking like Challenger crash.
Challenger, if
that
you
kind of
remember
stuff.
where the Challenger blew up, then that was your generation's defining moment.
Yeah.
But for millennials, they had September 11th, but so many people felt that defining moment. And you also had a defining moment for millennials being the Johnson & Johnson scare, where all the parents then became very worried. So when we wonder, why do millennials talk to their parents 22 and a half times a day? It's because their parents had to go through that.
Right, gotcha.
So, whereas, my parents dropped me off at summer camp, good luck to you, without even a call until they showed up the next month to pick me up.
Right. Maybe a pack of Band-Aids just in case.
Please.
Right.
But at different generations, right? Different ways that they're impacted, and then those millennials, and then you think of this next generation, this Gen Z, coronavirus is going to be their defining moment, and that was 2 years.
Yeah.
So what a different perspective, isn't it, for this next generation to think of 2 years that changed their life, that to them the type of learning has always been remote. What do you mean you had a teacher in front of the room? A chalkboard.
Yeah,
what is chalk?
Right? What is chalk?
A smartboard versus a chalkboard, just the ways we learn, the way we expect our children to learn, which then is our future employees.
Right. Fascinating. So when we get over to, and I heard you say this at one of the events, and you're talking about college students, and technically if you're a first-time college student, you're pretty much a Gen Zer right now, right? 23 and under kind of zone.
Your Gen Zers are in college. They're up to, absolutely.
Yeah, pretty much, right? So you said something at one of your events and that stuck out to me, and you said, these are people who are figuring out, do I work well remotely or not? It's almost like something they figured out about themselves. And how does that apply to the workforce today? Because these people are graduating now, and now there's an expectation that they have. So what are you seeing with the workforce now, or what recommendations do you have to businesses that are trying to hire people who are kind of born into that era?
Absolutely. And what a great question, because I bet you so many HR directors, recruiters are thinking the same thing. And with these Gen Zers, they've worked remote. They've seen how it works, but they've also seen whether they did well or they did not. Right? I think most people can tell, I did really well during the pandemic working on Zoom, and others are like, I did not thrive.
Yeah.
But I think you're seeing a lot more people that in this generation, they like the autonomy of doing what they want when they want to do it. This generation of Gen Z, they're not buying homes. They're not buying cars, right? They can do Airbnb. Why would they buy a home? Why would they buy a car? They can Uber or Lyft.
Absolutely.
My son is 16, and I actually said to him, your driver's license would be good for the whole family if you got one.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I could just Uber.
Oh my goodness.
And I said,
That's amazing.
with what money?
Yeah.
And he's like, they just pick you up. I go, and someone pays for that.
Right.
But he doesn't get the concept that there's not just the option of your driver's license. He sees there's these other options of why would I put money into a car?
Well, it's kind of interesting because they also, in the little bit of studying I've done, like things like Venmo, you better check it out because that's a big exchange. They're not even using money the same, right?
Think about, I did a team builder, and ironically, it was during a generation session. The irony is huge. And I did a team builder, and I said, okay, if everyone could get out some change, coins, metal money.
little circular
and
things.
People were looking at me like, got none of that. Because what I
Really?
was going to do is take the change and then pick a date and share something about that date.
Oh.
Right? Luckily,
Nice.
I, of course, as a good facilitator, brought change.
You had change with you, correct.
But so many people looked at me as if, who carries change, let alone cash? But change, that's just crazy talk.
Wow.
So to the point of the different generations, how we spend money, how we share money. My son's on a baseball team. Every batting lesson, everything is through Venmo.
Wow. It's unbelievable. I upon hearing some of this stuff, I went ahead and downloaded the apps. Haven't set up my username yet. I gotta get up on the times here, But at least I put the app on my phone.
All right,
That's
and what
worth
generation
something.
are you,
So
Rob?
according to this, and this is where I get confused, I am falling as a fairly young Generation X. That's kind of where I'm at right now, So, but sometimes, and I think we talked about this at one of the events, when you get these people who are on the split lines, you can kind of identify with both generations a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Because some things I hear from the millennials, the older millennials, I'm like, yeah, I feel that. But then, but I still feel the Generation X thing too. You like how I threw a little Australian accent on there? The Generation X.
We've now gone international.
We have. I just like to keep a little international flair. Anyway, we're going to talk international politics next. Anyway, but you know what I mean? It's like, so I feel a little bit of both, and I kind of like barely remember Challenger, barely. But then some of the stuff that I heard from millennial stuff, I was like, yeah, that was very strong for me. So, I kind of see that, and in this way, I can practice what you're talking about here and really understanding what you're saying about the events and the defining moments.
And millennials are very particular to establish their identity by which part of the millennial, either the older millennial or the younger
It's
millennial.
like two halves, right?
And they literally will say, I'm not one of them.
Yeah. Right.
Said with love, and I'm not putting everyone into that category, but I do hear from a lot of the millennials, I would like a disclaimer.
I'm mad motivated and all this stuff. Yeah.
And because the millennials started doing things so differently, I think that's why they were called out in the workplace, and that's why they started getting that okay millennial, before the okay boomer.
Yeah,
I think the millennials were called out so early because they started saying, wait a minute, I don't want to work harder, I want to work smarter.
Yeah, I understand.
And I think that challenged the status quo, and then it became they don't want to work. No, it's not that they don't want to work, they work differently. So even seeing that huge shift of those millennials and which millennial wants to be affiliated with which grouping in the workplace specifically.
I've heard, and maybe this is a good time for us now that we kind of established who's who in this agenda. Maybe talk about some of the specifics that you hear out there. So I've heard and read that if you look at the Gen Zer, that they're actually pretty hard workers and they're very frugal. Is this correct?
Much so. The Gen Zers are, according to Jason Dorsey's research, they will probably be the most fiscally responsible group because they saw their parents go through the housing recession. They saw them losing jobs.
Yeah.
So they're saying, I'm not going to be as loyal as, say, the boomer generation, the traditionals, the veterans, right? They work for the same company for 20 years because their dad worked for the same company for 20 years. Millennial, this new generation, rather, the Gen Zers are seeing it differently of, I want to find things that I actually love, but I'm not going to spend money on things.
Right.
Experiences are huge. Travel. right? And college. You know, my generation was told it's a privilege to go to college and you have no choice, but you're going to college.
That's true.
Right?
That's true, yeah.
This generation is being told college is an opportunity, but there's so many other things you could do. I mean, think about it. An influencer is getting paid more than I am, and I have an undergrad degree and grad degree of an MBA.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's other opportunities, there's options that we would have never thought of that are going to change how people spend money. Why would I go into debt for college?
See, and I think
and that's not all. That's just a few, and the perspective that I'm hearing specifically from parents that I would never think would say this, but they said that's what my children's generation will be about.
But that's kind of what, I mean, weren't millennials doing the same thing as Gen X for the most part? You know, they were anticipating going to college. Maybe not the younger side, and maybe that's the division, but a lot of the millennials I know, you know, they were in the same boat. It's like, I'm supposed to go to college, I get my bachelor's degree, I do the whole 9 yards, and then they racked up all that debt. So now we get to maybe the younger millennials and the Gen Zs. But we got a challenge now because we're still trying to run businesses in America. And you find people are saying, yeah, I don't want to work that many hours. Not that they don't want to work hard, but I don't want to work that many hours. I want to experience things and I want to work smarter. But how is the typical business that, you know, running a service industry where, you know, you can't work from home, or a construction industry where you can't do that from home? How are we supposed to hire people going forward, and what do you recommend there?
Wow, that's an open-ended question, and we'll start with small little nuggets. I think one thing is looking to really meet people where they're at. We have to do that more than ever. You know, we used to hear that concept of the golden rule, which still applies. You know, treat people the way you want to be treated. But to be competitive now, and the world is so much more diverse, specifically with these generations, now we have to follow the platinum rule, is treat others the way they want to be treated.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, we have to conduct business. But finding out, hey, you know, if this person really is more front of the house, more energy, extrovert, how can we find skills for them that works hours around that skill? And then there's also looking at when are the flex times? Who can have those shifts? Who can't? What I've seen lately, a few of my clients are using scheduling apps, and what they're doing is coming up with a red as the non-negotiable hours, right?
Okay.
So if your organization has staff meetings on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, that's a non-negotiable. Everyone is expected to be here as part of the team, right? Then there might be other hours that's non-negotiable, don't even ask. And then other color code might be for their role, right? If they're building something, having to produce, you're not in that color code, so therefore you are not eligible for that flex time, remote work. How can you make it fair and equitable, right? Because that opens up a whole other can of worms of, you know, well, Rob likes that employee better than me, lets her stay home, and then you hear the gossip and the rumors, and you have to address those too. So being equitable across all the generations is another issue to think about with that.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I mean, that's a real world issue, I think, because it does an interesting flip-flop, which is how do we as employers, we understand the ground rules, and does it make some people more valuable than others in one way or another? And let me explain my question. And it may be there's no answer to this question right now, but we're in the roofing business here at Monarch Roofing, and I can tell you that, you know, at the end of the day, I have to have people on job sites doing jobs. There's no flex time.
Absolutely.
There's no working from home. And if there's less of those people willing to do that at some point than there are of people who want to work from home and everything, which one has got more value? And that's and I don't know how to really word it other than supply and demand says maybe this person has more value. So how do we size that up going forward? And I know that's more of a philosophical question, but I don't know if you're hearing this.
You have to pay bills. I mean, you exist as a business for a reason, right? There's a quote by Zig Ziglar says, the purpose of any business is to make a profit. For then and only then can you make an impact. You know, so you still have to run a business. And those are your minimum standards, as I like to call them. Then that way you can lay your head down at night saying, we said the expectations were this. We know what success looks like in our industry for our market. So I think depending on your expertise, you have to do that. You know, a house isn't going to build itself, a roof isn't going to build itself, a contract isn't going to sign itself. You still need human people. But what I would look to is what are things that you could outsource that don't keep your people on the site as long or in the office as long, right? How can you give them some quality of life that perhaps another business could that you can say, yes, but we also offer you this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Mental health, mental well-being is such an important thing right now. And I'm seeing that as a competitive edge, especially among, the millennials and the Gen Zers. They want to see that you care about them as a human, as a person. So are you also offering those type of things in addition to saying, I can't offer you remote, but we take care of our employees so well?
Absolutely.
The millennials, the research tells us, millennials want to work for a winning team. Doesn't mean they have to be the number one right now, but they have potential. Second thing millennials are looking for is professional development. They know they're not going to be sticking around for 20 years, but they are going to stick around 5 to 6 years. They want to brag about the company that they just left. So what can we do to give them that professional development so when someone says, dang, they got her? How did she get so good? Well, she was at Monarch.
Right.
So how do you launch that next generation or that next crop of employees, because they probably won't stay as long as you might want them to. But how can we prepare them to really represent your brand when they go back into the industry and people say, how did you know that? How are you empowered to do that? Then you kind of become the word of mouth without even having to spend that money on marketing because you took care of your employees.
I was going to say, is this why we see so much of like some of the big corporations? I don't want to name names, but you'll even see this on the commercials. They'll say things like, we're giving a college fund to our employees, and they're doing things like this. Is that why they understand this?
I would hope that they're trying to put back into their employees so they don't have to spend the marketing dollars to bring new ones in.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think, too, people want to build good people. What would you do to clone the very best people you had here?
Right.
So how do we get those people? And I'm a big believer of educating. Let people know who you are. And I don't mean just from marketing. I mean from teaching people what it is you do. Getting in the schools. Telling them it's worth doing what we do. Right? Because if it looks too gimmicky and hot and flashy, then that might not be around for those 5 to 10 years. They want to see, wow, this success has been built up. Let me tell you, millennials and Gers like a story. They like a story by video more than anything. TikTok, right?
YouTube and such, yes.
But how can you tell your story in a way that they get it in such a short time? We've spent time, I work with a client, and they have this beautiful 8-minute, 7 minutes too long, video. And I'm saying
7 minutes too long.
And I'm saying, you're Gen Zers, you want summer staff.
Yeah.
Gen Zers they're swiping beyond that.
Right. Gotcha.
And so how can you make it so it captures them but doesn't look fake? It's got to look genuine and true. So I think those are things, too, to think about. How do we bring them in, right?
I think that's a really great point. And, I can see, and everybody looks at their own interest, and I think that's a part of the problem here. If you have baby boomers hiring people, they're like, oh, this is what I want, right? But I see it in even, have you ever been on, you could be on Google or something, and you see a article, and the article will be like, there's written stuff, or what you're looking for is written stuff, and you find out it's just a video. And I'm like, oh, I just want to read about this. I don't need to see a video, especially if I'm, like somewhere where I can't listen. But what you're telling me is, Gen Zers, give me a 1-minute video. I'm really, really happy, right?
Gen X, we actually want to read it.
We want to read some
stuff.
And
the boomers want to print it out.
Right.
So
gotcha.
Every generation takes that stereotype, so to speak.
The paper industry is taking a beating right now from the,
Oh, dang. You can definitely, you go to a meeting and you look around the room and you can just tell which generation it is, of who's printed it out, who's reading it on their phone, right?
Yeah. You know what's a sad spot in the industry is, I see the paper guy. He goes through my neighborhood. I walk my dogs early, to work here. We work early, and I walk my dogs at like 4:30 in the morning, right? And this guy, the paper guy, it takes him like 2 seconds to deliver all the paper. He's literally like 1, 2, 3, and he's out of there. And by the way, not knocking anything, but not a lot of people buying that now.
Correct. And you look, but here's the deal. If you look at the data now with the generation following Gen Z, this generation Alpha, they're going to want hard print because they've never had it.
Oh, no way.
It's going to be like retro, vintage, right? Whereas my generation was like, send an email. It's revolutionary.
You really got to be smart to predict this, because I'd be like, according to my data, they like playing with Play-Doh and stuff. I don't know, how do you predict what they're going to be into? But I hear you.
There are people who this is what they do, and they forecast this, and we have to pay attention to the data, what the trends show us, and of course what the patterns. And how can we learn from it and lead better, right?
Yeah, it's a great point. So we want to be ahead of things and talk about professional development. And I'd like to go back to that for a minute.
Absolutely,
because
sure.
I think professional development is very counterintuitive. It's one of those ones I talked about. I'm going to give you resources so you can potentially grow past my company, right? Or develop yourself for the future. What are some good ways to do professional development? Are we talking about like online courses? Or are we talking about just cross training? What does that look like?
There's so many different opportunities, especially if you want to build on the strengths of the current employees that you have. Do you have a mentoring program? And not a mentoring program where you just go to lunch.
Yeah.
A mentoring program that truly has strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats discussed. Is there a genuine mentoring program? Is there an externship? Is there an internship to show you that you value education and showcasing your industry? I think there's also professional development in your own community. I'll plug the Chamber's Leadership Grand Strand.
Oh, yeah.
There's young professionals, the Grand Strand Young Professional Group as well, to learn how to network, how to talk with people. Those are organizations that we hope to keep people here.
Yeah.
That younger generation who might get lured away by the big city lights, we want to keep them here.
Yeah, definitely.
So professional development is also networking and finding those sources that are already available in our community, but also what are classes? Or Georgetown Tech right now has free classes until 2023.
Wow.
So those are things to think about. There's also TED Talks. I am a big believer of doing a TED Talks,
Good
do a
stuff.
discussion. You and I are both readers. I believe that leaders are readers. So, and don't tell me you can't afford it, because there is a thing called the library.
Oh, yeah.
And you can actually check out a book.
Really?
Real
Those are still
hard.
around?
Yes,
Man.
Gen Xers, unite with
That's
me.
awesome.
It's called a book.
There's that. And also, if you ever go to some of these discount stores, you can buy a really cheap book nowadays. We got one of our employees here, and she reads every day. And she's got a little novel she's reading that was like $2.99. So it's like, yeah, she can afford to do this, right?
Absolutely. Or, have a library.
Yeah.
I'm sure managers, leaders in the books have read a book and they're done with it. Could you pinpoint someone, identify them, and say, hey, I think you would really benefit from this?
It's a really cool idea. I like that.
So taking that one-on-one time, I think, is huge for professional development, because, you think about where leaders grow. They grow when someone invests in them, and they feed into them and say, hey, I see something in you. So do not undervalue the power of that one-on-one professional development and encouragement.
That makes a lot of sense. So speaking of books, do you have a particularly favorite book, or not even a favorite book, but do you have any good books you recommend to business leaders that they should get into?
I have a recommended book list if anyone would want to. I'm happy to share that.
Yeah.
But I'm a big believer. I love Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
It's a good book. Read it.
And I think it should be read every 5 to 10 years, because you have different seasons in your life. It changes. The message is different. It lands differently depending upon pre-kids, post-kids, VP position, and things like that you really want to think about. So I love that book. For women, I love the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg.
Okay.
What great messages she has for how to realize that you're not going to have balance. It's just not going to happen all at the same time. So I think finding a book that resonates with you is the most important. When people say, I'm not a reader, I'm like, you haven't found the right book or the right author. I'm a big Patrick Lencioni fan.
Okay.
5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So I love reading, and I'm actually going to be attending the Global Leadership Summit through Willow Creek. Okay. And that's usually where I get my new books for the year. So that's August 5th and 6th. So I'll probably have some new books to recommend when I see you next.
That sounds good. And I almost feel like I need to have a book section of this, because as I listen to people, some of the best books I've read are coming from people on the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, I would tune in just for the book recommendation tips. So let me know if you have those started.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, as we get towards the backside of the show, is there anything else that you feel like that not even business leaders, but just stuff that we need to know that you think are relevant topics that maybe we haven't covered yet?
Absolutely. When it comes to generations or just leading people, humans, can we just show some more grace and kindness?
Yeah, that's fair.
I think right now, people are going through a lot, different stories, different backgrounds, different experiences. And when we judge people and come at them with a okay boomer or well, we assume you don't want to work because you want to work remotely. Let's ask 5 more questions. And that's to myself included. How can we show a little more grace and kindness as we try to lead through these generations? Because every generation has something amazing and valuable that the others don't.
Fair.
So if we could just learn to show grace across the generations and lead that way, I think we would not only have a better community, but just a better leadership world.
So it really a great workplace would be having a little diversity of generations.
Amen.
Right?
And do a diversity audit. Let me tell you,
Yeah.
I just spoke at a recent organization, and I looked out and I was talking about diversity, and the diversity was not in the room.
Oh, yeah.
So think about that too. Are you looking at your demographics from a generation point and who you have at the table? Make
Okay.
sure every voice is heard.
That's fair. So one other really specific one, and that is, so when we get down to the point that we are ready to review our employees, okay, and you talk about the motivating of employees, here at this company, we do a 1-year review. We do an initial review, but then we'll do a 1-year review. What's the proper way to do with the younger generations? And I'm focusing on them again because I feel like we kind of feel like we know how to handle boomers and
Right.
and we know how to handle Gen Xers. But when we're talking about the younger generations, what is the best way to give them feedback in a way that's going to construct and help them grow?
Because it is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Boomers, they've been conditioned, no news is good news, keep my head
Yeah,
down. As
exactly.
long as I don't hear from you, we're fine.
Yeah.
Gen Xers are, excuse me, can I have a moment? Can I have some feedback?
Mm-hmm.
Millennials are, I need some more feedback.
Yeah,
and
like
it's
right
every
now.
10 minutes. Yes, right now.
Okay, fair enough.
Right? And I think with the Gen Zers, the next generation come up, they've been getting most of their feedback remote, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very short, very sweet. But they want feedback, but they want it specific,
Okay.
right? They don't want good job. They want, this was good about it.
Okay.
Right? So they want to hear, and also, why does that matter? Millennials, so much so. Millennials want to hear, why does that matter to you? So when
Okay.
you tell me to be professional, I need more. Why is that
That's
important?
not enough, right? I need to
Do
know the
not-
why.
And that's another thing. Respect across the generations is defined differently. In a performance review, if you use the word respect, you better define it.
Good call.
So it's very different. So even being very specific in our reviews to say, here's what I see, here's how it impacts, and here's how I want to help grow you with that. If they see that you want to grow into them, then there's a reason for the constructive criticism and feedback. It's more received, believe it or not, than some of the other generations.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that what you're saying is we think that naturally we can say you did a good job because of this, but we really need to define what a good job is first
Correct.
and foremost.
Like showing up
Yeah.
is expected. Showing up is not a great
Surprise.
job. So
Right.
even when people say to me, well, they don't understand, I say, well, have you told them? There's an expression in training that if they haven't caught it, we haven't taught it.
Okay.
So think about that from your company culture. If they haven't caught it, we haven't taught it. So teach your millennial, teach your Gen Zer. That's on you. If you want to see a difference, make that change and tell them clear expectations. If no one's told them, that's not on them.
Yeah, it's fair points. So, Eileen, the Meeting Institute, what else? How can you help businesses right now? Give us a little plug for your business and what you can do for a local business that needs some help. What kinds of things can you do to really pump them forward right now?
My focus lately has been really designing customer service programs and not necessarily doing all the training, but working with the decision makers to enhance the culture, to really be more user-friendly, customer service focused. So I'm all about creating that brand that comes with the service, and that service has to be excellent. So I love doing that, and I also love being able to give back to the community. So I definitely want to make sure I'm doing things that are keeping me active as a servant leader as well.
So cool. Yeah, that's been where some of my greatest growth has come from as a professional. It's always when you're giving back and you're not doing the thing that's necessarily putting money in your pocket, but you are doing those things that build you as a person. So, well, very cool. Well, Eileen, this has been a real pleasure today. I know you got a lot more information always, but you guys can check her out at the Meeting Institute. And how can people find you online and so forth?
I am on Facebook. I am a pure Gen Xer in the fact of I've created boundaries for myself.
Nice.
And you can get me on Facebook, or feel free to reach me on email, eileen.soisson@gmail.com.
And she'll have a TikTok account coming back in 2024?
I'm a TikTok stalker, but not a creator.
Okay, gotcha. Well, and that's okay, because that's probably like 50% of the people at least, I would think. So, all right. Well, Eileen, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. And we appreciate everybody listening. Make sure, share us, like us on Facebook, all those good things, and on TikTok, where we're really big here. And we will see you guys next time on Crowning Connections.